Hello, my name is Bonita Risley. I'm the Collections Coordinator at the Avalon History Center in Avalon, New Jersey. The following is a presentation on the history of Avalon from the 1940s through the Ash Wednesday storm of 1962. It's the second in a series of 3 covering the history of Avalon, and I hope you have a chance to watch the first and the third. So, just what did Avalon look like at the time America entered World War II in December 1941? To get a good idea, we must first take a little look back at the 1920s and 30s, which, as it turns out, were a seesaw in the fortunes of Cape May County and of Avalon in particular. There was massive development, acceleration in the growth of Avalon's infrastructure, the demise of Avalon's 3 leading development companies, one of which was the Avalon Development Company, but also the Avalon Improvement Company and the South Jersey Realty Company. There was massive borrowing, recession, depression, foreclosures, the eventual beginnings of a financial recovery, the revival of house construction, borough bankruptcy, and then booming lot sales. The whole of Cape May County had benefited, especially during the 1939 to 41 phase of FDR's New Deal, when Public Works Administration construction program came into being. More locally, Mayor Bergner's legacy of getting the Ocean Drive bridges constructed in the late 30s brought in contractors, speculators, vacationers, anyone with means, mainly from Philadelphia. They had Avalon in their sights. Early 1941 really was the day of the developer in Avalon. The borough had in its possession thousands of empty lots due to the massive foreclosures for tax non-payment during the Depression years. So, Avalon sold them off at extreme reduced prices, with the provision that houses had to be constructed within 1 year of purchase. The housing boom was on. Houses sprang up all along the streets, which were graded, paved, sidewalked, and set up with sewer and water, which had been facilitated by the borough in the late 1920s. So, it's no surprise that just about the whole county followed the countrywide trend of trying to ignore what was seen as the emergent European war. Despite the obvious signs of preparedness, especially along the coast, and even September 1940's first peacetime draft in American history, and Roosevelt's declaration of a state of unlimited emergency in May 1941, they wanted no part of it. They just wanted the growth and the prosperity to continue. But it all came to a crashing halt in December 1941. Development was suspended for the entirety of the war years. There was no more grading, no more graveling, no paving of roads, and those houses that had sprang up as if overnight were suddenly scattered and solitary, or in spread out little groupings. Dune Drive itself only ran to 37th Street, and vegetation very quickly reclaimed the former railroad right-of-way. From 37th Street down to 80th was in effect an overgrown, unkempt trail, totally impassable by car. It was a virtual wilderness with just a few shacks and one house on 57th Street. This is the way Avalon was to remain, virtually unchanged, from the beginning to the end of the war years and even beyond. But this isn't to say that Avalon went to sleep during those years, far from it. Construction and development may have ceased, but the town was abuzz with war effort programs, and especially with military personnel, all leading to local business and entertainment growth. Life had to go on, and Avalon was still a seaside town. Might as well make the most of it. Cape May County's use of blue dim-out lights along the boardwalks were even advertised as adding a relaxed and romantic atmosphere for the wartime vacationer. Victory gardens on the very many vacant lots were encouraged by the borough of Avalon, probably the only time fruit and vegetable growing took place on any sizable scale in Avalon. Red Cross and civil defence units began to organise in communities all over the country. Those who were unable to be drafted were certainly able to get involved in defence at a very local level. Some of you may recognise some of the faces in this photograph. Pop Gehringer, Franklin Chew, Chester Cobb Sr., Henry Armstrong, Chester Cobb Jr., Bill Tozier, Frank Jumpy, Gilbert Smith, just a few individuals. Just as well, they did organise as German convoys and especially U-boat activity had been increasing along the eastern seaboard coast, such as this German submarine U-858, which surrendered off the coast of Cape May on May 14, 1945. Although the rumours of collaboration and nighttime raids were blown out of all proportion, still the threat was real enough to alarm the borough, who then employed local man Chester Cobb Sr. as special night patrolman along the beaches, until such time as the US Mounted Coast Guard took over in 1942.
In fact, during the war, the three of us used to go up to 21st Street, and it was the gazebo that they have now. Of course, it was a different one, you know. And we would sit there and we could see the convoys.
Wow.
One night I was coming from the movie, and everything was blacked out. And I'm walking down the boardwalk to 21st Street, because then my mom and dad got a place up at 23rd Street. They sold the other one. And the soldier stepped out and he said, hello. All as I could think, he was a little guy and had the gun over his shoulder.
Yeah.
And I ran like the dickens, and I thought, that poor guy must think I'm crazy. All as I thought is, someone had landed here, you know.
1942 was coincidentally the same time that Chester Cobb Sr.'s son, Chester Cobb Jr., was inducted into the US Army. So, the US Mounted Coast Guard took up residence in the old life-saving station at 15th Street, with corrals and kennels across the street. That's right, corrals and kennels.
And then they had the Coast Guards come, and they had the horses and the dogs.
On the beach.
Yeah. You'd be walking on the boardwalk and you'd hear the horse going down there.
As well as horses, such as Boots here, and Flash, seen here with Spencer Windle, who wrote this. There were also dogs, such as Shep and Tuffy, Spencer's service dogs. And Pudgy, my particular favourite. You just got to look at that face. I could talk forever about Pudgy. Rumour has it that one of the Coast Guard dogs had a reputation for begging for ice cream while strolling along the boardwalk. And I think it had to have been Pudgy. You can tell from the way he looks. With the influx of so many young men and women, but mostly men, and mostly serving in the Coast Guard into Avalon, where were they going to stay? And what were they going to do during their downtime? Not to mention, how were Avalon's permanent residents going to be affected? In a word, magnificently. The women of Avalon took the lead in manning the local chapter of the USO, and no one was more active in that organisation than Mabel Ballinger, seen here several years later. She took many young servicemen under her motherly wing, not to mention looked after the junior hostesses who volunteered to befriend the newcomers to town. Some of the many servicemen were lucky enough to be billeted at the Avalon Hotel. Others stayed with local families. All were made welcome at the USO Club up on the second floor of the Avalon Borough Hall. Mabel Ballinger again is seen here. They were especially made welcome at the dances at the Marine Ballroom on the second floor of the pier above the movie theatre. Dances had been a focal point in the Marine Ballroom upstairs at the pier since 1929, but during the war years they became ever more important, maybe as a small sign of resistance to the blackouts, which, by the way, caused ocean-facing windows to be completely blacked out, as were headlights, to the shortages, the hardships, the threats and the fears of the unknown. For the younger crowd, the dances were a wonderful melting pot of locals, those from neighbouring towns, visiting military personnel, anybody just wanting to forget the troubles of the war for an hour or two. Live bands played regularly, but were later replaced by a jukebox. I even have the key to the jukebox that did play in the Marine Ballroom, so if anybody has that jukebox, I've got the key and it could be time for a party. Live music played on Saturday nights, when the dress code was formal. The most important night of the year had always been the Lifeguards' Ball, a serious dress-up affair. Those too young to attend would just go down to the pier to catch a glimpse of the glamour and pizzazz, and not to mention the fabulous dresses. The most important person in the Marine Ballroom was Harold Tex Texter, who ran the dances. He stood for no nonsense and was beloved by all. The ballroom had no air conditioning, but it did have a wraparound deck and sea breezes. What could be better? It also had Tex monitoring any inappropriate behavior and switching on the lights at will. Rumour has it that he had rigged up a cord from the light switch over to his chair by the door. He didn't even have to move an inch to put a halt to any shenanigans. He did have everybody's best interests at heart and ran the dances at the pier every summer for years. He was very much loved. We're lucky enough to have several of his ledgers from the dances, one of which is on display in the 1940s gallery at the History Centre, donated by his daughter, Linda Texter Hall. Of course, I can't mention the pier without mentioning Clarence "Pop" Gehringer, with his famous brown cow root beer floats at 15 cents and Avalon famous hot dogs with buttered and grilled rolls for 10 cents.
Oh, and Pop Gehringer's, I guess you heard about him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But tell me.
And I always said I'd love to have what he had there. He had this little beer barrel. And he would pull the lever,
Uh-huh.
and you'd get your root beer.
Oh.
We used to have what we called brown cow. And he'd have this big glass, and he put a dip of ice cream in there, and then pour root beer over it. And we call it a brown cow.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, oh, it was. And he was famous for his hot dogs, too. You know, he used to slit them and put them on the grill
Uh-huh.
with cheese on there.
His peanut roaster was especially popular with moviegoers, much to the dismay of the young kids employed to clean up in there. No such thing as child labour laws then. Shells were aplenty. Pop and his wife Amelia rented store space in the pier from 1929 to 1946, when they gave up the lease and concentrated on their 8th Street store, famous for its penny candy. As well as the pier, the dances, the movie theatre, the social aspect of the boardwalk as a whole, there was also the Avalon Yacht Club at this time. But this was mainly patronised by year-round residents and vacationers of a little older generation. The Avalon Yacht Club was originally formed out of the old casino club members. They were a group of men looking for a place to sit down and have a drink and take our wives to dance. They weren't too concerned with sailing at that point. Money was raised from family and friends, and in 1941 they applied to the borough for a spot of land, which they got at 7th Street and the Bay, the community dump. Despite the war being ongoing, with gas, food and alcohol rationing and shortages, not to mention the blackouts and security considerations, the official dedication of the Avalon Yacht Club went ahead in May of 1942. And not only was there somewhere to sit and drink, but summer that year saw at least 5 interclub regattas. By the end of the war, the club had approximately 100 annual members, 60 proprietary members, and 45 junior members, and was itself a member of the South Jersey Yacht Racing Association, so they were serious about sailing after all. The 1950s saw the yacht club's swimming and sailing programs flourish, with memberships ever growing. Today it has some of the best and most popular junior sailing programs in South Jersey. Anyway, back to the 1940s. Gas rationing did hurt the resort business all over Cape May County, but not as much as natural disasters did. The main one being the hurricane of September 14, 1944. While a Category 3 at landfall, the Great Atlantic Hurricane had been a Category 4 storm, delivering sustained winds of 93 miles per hour and gusts up to 125. While estimates vary, I'm going with this approximate estimate. It caused $36 million worth of damage. That's upwards of $300 million in today's money. But only 200,000 of that was from Avalon and Stone Harbor. Although both towns lost their fishing piers, and Stone Harbor's boardwalk was lost, never to be replaced. This is a typical scene in Stone Harbor after the storm. Over the next couple of days, children amused themselves during daylight hours by surveying the storm damage and treasure hunting through the storm debris on the beach, once the flooding had subsided, that is. Now, I'm not at all sure that this is a photograph from 1944. I'm just assuming, and it looks about right to me. By the way, until late 1940s, hurricanes were not officially named. The first US named hurricane, unofficially named that is, was George, which hit in 1947. The next one given a name was Hurricane Bess, named for the First Lady, Bess Truman, in 1949. Between 1953 and 1979, only women's names were used to name tropical storms, but since 1979, men's and women's names have been alternated. Of course, the 1944 hurricane was not the first or the last to affect the Barrier Island. I'm just going to put up a series of pictures. They're few and far between. It was wartime and carrying cameras around was generally restricted. Also, houses were still few and far between, scattered and remote in a lot of cases. Remember, there hadn't been much construction going on for 3 or 4 years, and the roads had not been upgraded or maintained. Gravel and dust trails through Avalon into Stone Harbor were the norm. This is Captain Charlie Fort's rowboat rental in the back bays. These are all properties on 5th Street. This is on 6th Street, much the same story. And this is Dune Drive from 10th Street. This is Ocean Drive. And again, Ocean Drive, a lot of people are very familiar with this photograph. But enough of the doom and gloom. Not so long after the Great Atlantic Hurricane, the war at last ended. So, war was over. Let's get back to development and construction. But not in Avalon. Not in comparison with Ocean City, Stone Harbor, and other South Jersey resorts, that is. They were experiencing rapid post-war building construction and infrastructure booms. Avalon, for some reason, remains still a little sleepy from the war. Bayberry to the right of us, Bayberry to the left of us, with mosquitoes, rabbits and hoppy toads, to quote Robert Penrose Sr. Some construction was happening in Avalon. 29 new homes were built in 1947, 39 in 1949, and 53 in 1951. And most often, they were these kind of pre-cut houses. They were advertised in Gimbel's department store in Philadelphia, of all places. This is called the Starfish, by its longtime owner, Martha Crowley. It wasn't until 1955 that Avalon exceeded its pre-war construction pace. For a few years after the war, foreclosures due to tax non-payment continued to be a burden for the borough, until the law firm of Anthony J. Caffieri and Maxwell J. Hoffman offered to complete mass liquidation of the borough's almost 5,000 tax certificates for a flat $80 fee each. Delinquent tax non-payers were offered a chance to pay back taxes and recover their property, or liquidate, or, failing that, to foreclose. By January 1957, the foreclosure program was completed, with over 4,000 properties being foreclosed. Opportunities in Avalon land sales were finally discovered. Lots started being bid on at $120, with $240 for a corner lot. They started to be sold in the dunes south of 37th Street. But the borough did forbid any removal of the dunes. This was a huge, if sadly belated, shift, as was the move away from mass speculation to individual sales and current homeowners buying up lots to increase the lawn areas around their existing homes. It so happened that exchanges took place too. Property owners would offer the borough lots in exchange for more desirable ones in a different location. There was an awful lot of wheeling and dealing going on. The construction boom was definitely back on, and certain builders were well out front. Tito Macchia became a frequent buyer and builder of single-story bungalows. Tozier Kerr, William Tozier Jr. and Betty Kerr became a big Avalon success story with their upside-down architectural style. And James Tracy was seen to be building all over Avalon. However, hundreds of lots were being sold on streets that only existed on paper. And those roads that were in existence were in a shocking state of repair after years of neglect. Taxes were raised, neglected roads were repaired at the same time as new ones were laid out. Road repair and building was a high priority. On the subject of roads, February 1955 saw the passing of Ordinance 278, which renamed 2nd Avenue to Dune Drive. It all seems a little odd, as even then most of 2nd Avenue was nowhere near any dunes. Just a very short section, which was, as now, totally obscured by trees and bushes. A few months later, Ordinance 281 was introduced to rename 1st Avenue to Pennsylvania Avenue, but thankfully that never passed. Back to the roads though. While there were more cars than ever coming into Avalon and struggling with the road construction, can you imagine today putting up with the dirt and the gravel tracks everywhere? It was still very safe out there on the streets.
I came down in my dad built in 1958. We built a home at 18th and 1st, and there were no other houses on the street at the time in the 100 block or the 200 block. 18th Street, as a matter of fact, wasn't even through, and between 18th Street and 16th Street, there was the remnants of an old park that was called Mosquito Park. There was groundwater in the middle of what would be the 100 block of 17th Street, which is where the epicenter of Mosquito Park was. We used to cut through all the bushes and weeds. We would go over to 20th Street to meet up with the Sylvesters and play ball with them at 19th and 1st. Once again, there may have been 2 or 3 houses around in that in a few square block area. But that was it. Like I said, no streets, very few streets. The streets that we're in were dirt, and the ones that were paved, such as 2nd Avenue, 1st Avenue, and Avalon Avenue, were paved with liquid asphalt, tar. Really, the guy would come around with the wagon and just lay down the hot tar oil, and that's how the streets were.
Kids would go off on their bikes in the mornings and not be seen at home again until dinner time. Avalon was their playground. Dads would drop the family off in town on Friday, hang out for the weekend, and then take the car back to Philadelphia and go off to work for the weekend, leaving Mum and the kids transportless. But it wasn't the drama that it would be today. Much was delivered. Avalon had its own ice plant, Otto Wonders, on 3rd Avenue between 7th and 8th Streets. It did burn down in 1956, unfortunately. It delivered ice blocks in various sizes and put them straight into the ice boxes outside of houses. Most houses had an ice sign to put up for the Iceman. £25, £50, £75, £100 of ice needed, depended on how many gin and tonics you wanted. Milk was delivered daily by Abbott's Dairy of Wildwood. Bread was delivered by either Bond and Freyhofer bakeries. Donuts and cookies were also delivered. Fruit and veg came via the huckster's truck. Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays saw Jimmy Ludlam and later on Nippy Heaton and Whitey. They'd drive the old blue truck around town, piled high with Jersey fresh fruit and veg. Housewives and children gathered to bargain and also to catch up on the latest Avalon news. It was more of a social event. Meat came from Caster's Meat Market on the east side of Ocean Drive between 24th and 25th Streets, where Tonio's is now. Or from the south side of 21st Street, just over the bridge, where Honer's Grocery and Gustafson's grocery stores had been. It moved from one location to the other, but I don't know which way around it was. What I do know is Mr. Caster was from Goshen and made deliveries in a big refrigerated truck. Unlike these two gentlemen, fish came from them, from Sprouse and Plank's fish markets, and they had no refrigeration. Once a week, Ganser's Bakery from Wildwood would deliver baked goods. In the late 40s and 50s, Ocean Breeze Laundry of 37th Street, run by Mrs. Eldrop and Mrs. Radcliffe, would pick up and drop off laundry. Mrs. Eldrop's son Hop would do the deliveries in his 1936 Ford. There was even a shoe repair car that came in from Cape May Courthouse, and a knife and scissors sharpener that came once or twice a season, sharpened your utensils right in the back of a big truck. And these were just the services that came to you. There was, of course, so many new local businesses opening up as Avalon's population increased. Stores such as Sullivan's Department Store, seen here, on 21st and June. It opened in 1956, and in 1965 it moved to 22nd and June. Edith Greenan's Black Cat Gift Shop. Frank's Meat Market on 69th and 3rd Avenue. It was in existence from May 1950 to May 1964. There was a pie lodge on the south side of 20th Street and 5th Avenue. Rhoda's Grocery on Ocean Drive between 33rd and 34th Street. Gallagher's Liquor Store on Dune Drive. James Hardware, also on Dune Drive. And of course, very many more. So, let's round off with the Storm of 62. The effects of the storm of March 6th, 7th and 8th, 1962 was so much more devastating than previous coastal storms, even hurricanes. Because this time there were beachfront homes just sitting pretty, waiting to be destroyed. Of course, people were aware of the forces of nature constantly at work along the coastline, the inlet and even the back bays, but somehow failed to accept the inevitable. So in March of 1962, when the tides were already higher than normal due to a new moon and the spring equinox, and a monster storm was developing in the Atlantic, the inevitable hit hard and preparedness was minimal at best. Even before the 1962 storm, erosion was badly eating away at the north end's 6th and 7th Streets, where the inlet waters were now only half a block from the Avalon Hotel. Some concerned homeowners organised themselves to propose buying the land necessary to build a bulkhead from 6th Street and 1st Avenue to run diagonally along the inlet. The proposal was unfortunately opposed to, was then withdrawn and submitted. Fortunately, it was approved on February 26, 1962, but too late. The next few days saw the storm range over 5 successive high tides. Winds, waves, flooding, fires, complete devastation. This level 5 or extreme nor'easter ripped through 6 states, killing 40 people in total and injuring well over 1,000. In Avalon, it left scenes like this behind. This is 7th Street and 1st Avenue. Robert Penrose Sr. was fortunate enough to go up in a small plane when the storm passed and got some really terrific aerial shots. However, is it just me, or is it a little crazy that they built these homes so close to the ocean? Look at them, they're right on the beach even. People were just so blissfully ignorant. Well, I'm sure they had some kind of inkling somewhere in the backs of their minds, but fingers crossed was the extent of preparedness. The storm of 1962 is more than worthy of a presentation just on its own, so I'm just going to put up some images of the aftermath. They really say it all. This is actually a view from the Avalon Hotel porch. This is 6th Street and 1st Avenue, I think. It's so hard to tell with the water. This pile of rubble was what was left of Avalon Police Superintendent Lloyd Riggle's house. Another typical scene, this time of the dunes and the pier, because it wasn't just the houses that suffered. And animals, of course, also had to be rescued. But Avalon is resilient and recovered, just as it had before and since. But you can't fight and win against Mother Nature for too long. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.